All right, we're back. It's really important that we get the recording because people can't attend otherwise. So you asked me to go over Command Option or Command Shift L again?
You did Command Shift O, and then I lost you.
Yep. And so that opened this quick open thing. And then I started to type in my file name. Do you see that?
Yep.
And then I hit Option Enter. If I just hit Enter, then it'll close main.storyboard and it'll open the file. But if I hit Option Enter right here, it opens whatever file I'm opening on the right and leaves what I was already looking at on the left. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So now we need to connect up our UI to the code itself. So what you're going to do is over here on the left, you see how I have switch highlighted in blue? I can click on things over in the navigator. I have that highlighted in blue. I'm going to hit Control, and then I'm going to click and drag from the switch over to the code. Y'all see that? Gives me a blue line. Then when I let go, it's going to ask me, it's going to give me this dialog. At the top, we have outlet action or outlet collection. You want to click outlet. And here, let's call this thing light switch. Then I'm going to hit enter to make the connection. This adds a connection between the UI and the code. So we added that connection between the UI and the code, and this little circle indicates that it's successfully connected. Now, this variable has a scope within this entire view controller, and we can access it places. Now we're going to do that one more time, but this time we're going to add an action. So hit Control, click and drag, let go. And this time in this little drop down, we're going to select action. And we're going to name our action did switch. All with me? Cool. So what this action's going to do is it's going to be triggered every time we flip the light switch. So now what we'll do is we'll make the background yellow if the switch is on and black if the switch is off. So here, we're going to get a hold of our switch and we're going to ask if it's on or off. Self is the namespace that we use to talk about things that have their scope inside of the class. If you did just light switch here, it would work, but it's not really considered good practice. There are certain cases where you do have to use it. So now we're going to use our trick of hitting dot and seeing what happens to us. So what stuff can I call on light switch? Well, I can call custom mirror. That doesn't sound like what I want. Debug description, flat map hash value is on. So this is the thing that I want to use. So if the light switch is on, I'm going to turn the background yellow. And if it's not, I'm going to turn it black, right? So how do we want that light switch to start? Should we start with it on or should we start with it off? I'm indifferent. What do y'all think? Off. Off? Okay. We'll start with it off. So that code's going to go in here. So you'll notice that when we start the app, I've already switched mine so you can't tell, but it starts with the light switch on. So we're going to have to explicitly say in here, self.lightswitch is on. We can set is on directly to false, or we could say set on. And what'll happen if we set it to on is that it'll animate. It will animate on. So you'll see the animation when you're flipping it. That's not going to be relevant in this case because the view is just loaded, and so there won't be an animation for people to see. We're also going to set the background here. So we're going to use the view. All view controllers come with a view like this. We're going to set the background color. So our off background color is going to be black, which is different from what we see in the default setting, which is white. So we could do this a couple ways. We could either set the background on the storyboard, but I'm not going to do that right now because I want you to see how I would do it in code. So here, if I put a dot after self.view.background color equals, iOS is going to give me the option of some UI colors to use. I'm going to set that to black. The reason that it knows what to show me there is that it knows that a background color is of type UI color, which is an enum. It's an enumerated value. And iOS has already defined some colors for us with it. We could describe it as UI color dot black. Swift allows us to say just dot black, since it can infer that this is supposed to be a UI color. Cool. So we'll use this line of code again. Where the switch is off. There. And when the switch is on, that should be let's see. Yellow. Cool. So what's happening here? The view is going to load. We're going to set the switch to off. We're going to set the background color to black. And then when the switch happens, we're going to run this code that determines if the switch is on, and if it is, we'll set the background color to yellow. And if not, back to black. So let's run our code again and see what we get.
Sorry, Professor, how do you get the view controller scene navigation pane
The view
on the left there?
This one?
I lost it. Yeah.
So try shutting and reopening the main view controller, or the, sorry, main.storyboard. Does that get it?
No.
It does not. Let's see. And you don't see this either? You don't see view controller scene?
No.
And if you click on this, you get it?
No.
No. Let's see.
There is an icon on your far right screen, the screen with the actual app on it. In the bottom left corner of that screen, there's just like a little box with a line down. Yep.
Oh, yeah. Do you see this right here?
Oh, okay. I got it.
You got it back?
Thanks.
Rock on. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Got it back?
Yep.
All right. So here's our app. Has anybody tried this yet? It's beautiful, right? It's the most useful app on the planet. We're going to make $1 million with this app. So funny enough, when Apple first started allowing third-party providers to upload apps to the store, the first one to make $1 million was an app that didn't do much more than this. It played a noise when you hit a button. And that was literally all it did. And the shop that made that app made $1 million because people were purchasing it left and right. I will let you look up for yourself what the noise was. All right, so we have an app that does something. Pretty cool, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I think we should make a commit here. So let's hop into our, let's hop into Lights app here. Initialize a Git repository. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this and I'm gonna commit it with a message. Now I'm pretty careful about my commit messages. I want my commit messages to share what I did and why I did it. In this case, we don't necessarily have some esoteric bug that I need to explain why I did what I did. But what I am gonna say is added a light switch and changed the background color when the switch is flipped. And I'm gonna add some additional information in the lower area, which says app starts in the off position. Indicate that that's not, that we set that on purpose. People will tell you that your top line of your commit should be lower than 50 characters or 80 characters or whatever. And they're basing it on like IBM Selectric machines whose screens were only 80 characters wide in like 1981. And we just don't have to worry about that anymore. And so I don't. But if you hear that kind of thing, people will tell you that it is to make it more legible. And while that is, it's valuable to keep a brief top line in terms of legibility, I don't want you to worry so much about the exact number of characters of your top line commits. I will say in the GitHub view, I think it's only 50 characters wide or something like that, but I'm not that worried about it because I can click on it and see what the commit message says. I would much rather have a commit message that keeps another developer from getting lost than a commit message that fits in the GitHub window. So that's my small soapbox about commit messages. Next week, you get my large soapbox about commit messages, so get excited. All right, there's literally one of you that laughs at all of my jokes, and I always look at you. You know who you are. All right, so now we have this commit, right? And when we hit status, we don't have anything to commit, and our working tree is clean. So there is one more thing I want to do here, which is I want to rename my branch. I'm not comfortable with the name master for a number of historical reasons, so I always rename my master branch to main. The way I do that is with git branch M, which technically means move. On your operating system, moving something and renaming it are the same. Old name, new name, git branch -m master main. And now my branch is set to main. Little Git tricks like this will help you so much on any programming stack that we're going to talk about Git like 4 times in this class. All right, so we've done that. Now I want us to spend a little bit of time trying to do something, okay? We're going to spend some time trying it, and then we're going to join up again and we're going to work on it together. So here's what you're going to do, is you're going to try to turn this switch into a slider. So you have this slider available, and essentially what it's going to do is it's going to start out dark on your screen, and then when you slide the slider, the light is going to get brighter and dimmer, like in one of those fancy condo living rooms. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you until about 8:10 to give this a try, and then we'll go over it together. Sound good? Okay, rock on. How we doing? Good? You want to go through this?
Was the goal just to add the slider or to also add the functionality to where if it slid one way to the other, you change the colors?
The goal, so ideally both, but the idea of these in-class exercises to sort of get as far as you can, and then we go over it together. So I think sometimes it can be a little bit easier to sort of grasp things that we're going over if you've had to try it yourself a little bit first. And so then you sort of like understand where the tough points are and you're ready to look for those in what we're doing. So let's give it a try, shall we? Let me share my screen again. And let me say something that I said in the chat last time that I should have said aloud, is that when we're doing those in-class exercises, I'll stop sharing and then I'll watch the chat. So if you have questions, you can PM me. A couple people did. I'll try to get to you individually. All right, so we have this switch, right? We want to add a slider instead. And so Sarah brought up a good point in the chat. I generally use the object library with Command Shift or Command Shift L like that. You can also get to it with this plus button right here in the top bar on the right. Do y'all see that? So you can click on that and get it too. And so we see the slider there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the slider. I'm going to drag it on. My computer's going to lag and then it's going to let me. And then I'm going to click on that and I'm going to hit delete. And I'm going to move my slider in the middle. And I like a nice large slider. And so I'm going to pull on the ends here until it's long like that. And then I'm going to click it. I'm going to click on my bars over in the lower right again. I'm going to horizontally and vertically constrain it. I'm going to add those constraints. And I also want it to, I also want to constrain its width. So I'm gonna control click and then, oh wait. Let me do it. So I'm gonna control click and drag with both the beginning and the end of my click and drag on the item itself. And so that's going to open this width. It's going to open this pop-up and width is going to be an option. And what this is going to do is it's going to set this thing to the width that I have set it on my screen. Just whatever the number of points wide it is, it's always going to be that wide. But then I can look in my little preview. And I can see that it would be that wide horizontally too, which is good because I want it to be that I don't want it to get super like long on horizontal. Anyway, And so now if we run this, it would run, but the code, it wouldn't do anything. And so now let's go back to our view controller, Command-Shift-O, Option-Enter. I want you to notice something about this code. All the code is still there, but you see these little bubbles? You see how they're empty? The reason that they are empty is that we deleted the view component that they connected to. So now we're going to delete that code too, because we're going to get some practice with this control drag scenario. So we got our slider here. We'll get rid of this old code too. You can leave the background color starting at black. That's fine. Okay, so let's control drag. We're going to make an outlet. And I'm going to name this dimmer, because it's going to dim our lights. They still call it a dimmer, right? I feel like that's what they called it in the 90s when we had these in my house. Now I'm not rich enough to own a house, and so I don't have dimmers. All right. Then we're going to control drag, and we're going to insert an action. And this time, how would we name this, right? Because this is gonna run every time we change the thumb on this slider. And so I'm gonna call it dim value did change. The did indicates that this is happening after the change occurred. Will would indicate that it's about to occur. And we'll see some of that in iOS later. Okay. So now we got dim value did change. And what this is going to do is every time we change that slider, it's going to run. So we need to figure out how to access this value, right? So let's take a look at our dimmer. And let's use our dot trick again. Dot, current maximum track image, current minimum track image. These all look like images. Probably what I'm looking for is going to be what kind of value, you think? Any ideas?
Boolean.
A Boolean? Maybe a Boolean? Well, it would have been a Boolean for the switch, right? Because that would have been on or off. But now this dimmer is going to have a value between left and right. And so this time, what we're going to be looking for is going to be a number of some kind. So we've got maximum value, we've got minimum value. Let's see if there's just value. There is. So this is going to give us the value. Now I want to show you a little debug trick that you'll want to use sometimes. For now, when we move it, I want you to just print the value. So this isn't going to change the color yet, we're just going to print it. You'll be able to use print statements if you're trying to figure out what's going on in your code to be able to see what's happening. And we do this, right, with puts in Ruby, so we do it with prints in Python, that kind of thing. This is sort of like your most basic debugging tactic. We'll go over some others. I'm also going to do this. I want my dimmer, it looks like you can set its minimum value and maximum value, right? So I want to set the minimum value to 0, and I'm going to set the maximum value to 1. And I'm going to explain to you why I'm doing that a little bit later. But basically, you can have whatever numbers you want at the beginning, at the end, and I want 0 and 1 at the beginning and the end. All right, so now let's run our app. Great. It's halfway up, right? And it's off, but that's okay. All right, so I'm moving this back and forth. Let me move this so you can see. What do you notice happening? Down here in the console, you can see my numbers, right? This is where my value is at any given time. You can see how often that method gets called when my UI isn't freezing. If you don't have this panel on the bottom, you can open it and close it with this button in the upper right-hand corner. That console is going to give you access to that print, to standard out, we call it. Now let's just confirm that it's doing what we think it's doing. If the maximum value is 1 and the minimum value is 0, then when I come over here, I should get zeros, right? And I do. And when I go to the maximum value, I should get 1s. And I do. And it looks like between 0 and 1, the numbers go up. So that's good, right? This value is doing what we expect it to do. Great. So now let's make some changes to our app. First of all, if this thing is going to start black, then the value should start at the full off level, right? And now let's do something with our value. Self, view, background color. So now we're going to do, what color do you want to brighten to? Yellow looks really ugly when we do this. Ideas? Nobody has a favorite color? Everybody's favorite color optionals are empty. All right, well, I'm going to use my favorite color then. Let's go with pink. But we want to add a transparency layer to it. So when it's really dark on a dark background, we're going to use a super transparent pink, and we're going to make it more and more opaque until it's bright pink. So UI color has a method on it for this with alpha component. And so this is going to adjust the alpha channel of your color. And we're going to set the value to that alpha component. That's why we set the minimum value to 0 and the maximum value to 1. Because 1, an alpha channel of 1 is opacity. And an alpha channel of 0 is complete transparency. So let's add self.dimmer.value in here, and it'll give us an error because it wants a value of CG float in here. Value self.dimmer, this should not be an issue. Value of optional type UI slider. Let's fix it with an optional like this. I'm surprised a little bit of the issue. So it's saying cannot convert value of type float to expected type CG float. So what it's saying is that value comes out as a float and it needs a CG float. You're going to see this in a lot of UI methods. CG stands for core graphics, and it is the library that a lot of the graphics stuff for iOS is written in. Luckily, CG float gives us an initializer where we can just pass a float in like that. Does this make sense? Great. So I want to talk to you about one more thing I did because I did it fast. So I'm going to go back and do it slower. When I have self.dimmer.value here, I get an error because it thinks the dimmer is optional, right? So the reason here, let me make it, force it to reload. So remember how we talked about the force unwrapping earlier in class? These exclamation points that you weren't actually supposed to use. In the case of the UI, we use them pretty frequently, and you'll remember that this code was actually generated for us. The reason that we do this is because in Swift, if you have something that's an optional, either you need to provide a default value for it in the constructor, which we don't do in view controllers, or you need to initialize it inside of like right here, which we can't do with a view controller because a view controller is instantiated by the OS. However, we know that this dimmer is going to be here because once it's instantiated, a method is called by the OS that's called load view. And load view sets all this stuff up for us. So when we're setting up views, we can use the exclamation point and assume that our views are going to be there. All right, so let's run our app. All right, so we've got our dimmer, right? Somehow this maneuver, it's so silly, but it never gets old. I love doing this. So our dimmer works, right? So this is pretty exciting stuff. And we know a debugging tactic, which is printing things out. I'm going to show you one more debugging tactic, and then we're going to wrap this up and talk about homework. And that is the breakpoint. So if you click on a line like that, that's going to give you what's called a breakpoint. And then over here on the left side in your breakpoint navigator, you're going to see that breakpoint. And every time the code gets to this point, we're going to stop at this breakpoint. And so if I run this code again, the minute I move this, it's going to stop. Oh. So it stopped. You see this green thing? So it stopped at the breakpoint. And then in your console down here, you're going to see this thing. It says LLDB. We talked about this earlier. It stands for low-level debugger, and it's a way for you to look at things in your application. On the left side, you'll see that you can already check out some of your variables, right? You could see south, which is your view controller. You could see the dimmer. There it is, min value of 0, max value of 1. Looks good. And we can print out what our value is right now. PO space means print out self.dimmer.value. So it's at a very, very, very tiny, right, amount up because I slid it ever so little bit to the right before the debugger caught me. So this is, maybe if I were a faster slider, I could have got that number up a little higher, but I couldn't. So then I can hit this little button right here to step over this. And then the minute I move it again, I would hit the thing again, right? But you can use the debugger to inspect things in here. And then if you want to disable a debugger, breakpoint rather, you can click on it, and when it's dimmed out like that, it means it's disabled, and you drag it off to get rid of it. Cool? Rock on. So now you can build and debug iOS apps. I'm done with you. A's for everybody. I'm kidding. Don't leave me just yet. All right. So that's pretty much our material. I want to show you real quick what kind of thing we're going to be building in this class. So I'm going to show you an application, and you're going to see sort of the extent of what we might build. And if it would let me drag it onto my screen, that would be awesome. Come on. Can you see it? There's a wonderful app that I built. It's called Angry Birds. And it is just pictures of birds who look angry. I found these on Instagram. I didn't take these pictures of birds. But what this does is it loads all of these birds from the internet, and then I click on them and I can look at all of the birds, right? So you're going to build something kind of like this. Stop reading the bird description. I see all of you doing it right now. You can. I think I'm really funny, and so I tried to make a bird description. It's funny. But your app is going to be kind of like this over the next few weeks. And you don't have to use birds. I'm using birds as an example. But You'll notice that my bird has some attributes, right? My bird has a name. That's a string, right? And my bird has his picture, a picture. So I do this with an image URL, which is also a string. So he's got two attributes, a name and an image URL. It's a string. He also has got this description, which could be a string. So we're talking about a class called bird that has maybe 3 strings, you know, a name, an image URL, and a description. For one of your homework assignments, I want you to think about, if you were writing an app of this flavor, what kind of data you would want, okay? So maybe if you're really into sports, it would be something related to sports games, or maybe if you wanted to make an app that would track, I don't know, the nutrition value of different foods, you would have a food and you would have the name of the food and the protein content and the various vitamin contents. So you're going to come up with 2 or 3 ideas of what kind of model you would use in your app and what the attributes would be for that model. So that's one of your homework assignments. And I want to go over the others really quickly. Here. Yeah. Okay. So the second one is going to be to reply to the session 1 intro issue. So let me show you this. Inside of session 1 here, you have an issue. So this is where you're going to put any questions that you have on the class. From session 1, you can make an issue in here and I will respond to it. But I want you to get a little bit of practice using them by responding to this intro issue. So the issue is called introduction and it says, please introduce yourself to your classmates. I have provided an example introduction here. Feel free to include something about your hobbies or your pets. For this example, we will count plants as pets. And you'll just get to oh, look at this cat. Ow! Okay, so that's part 2. I apologize. I'll have you out of here in like a minute. Okay, 3, you're gonna go through the intro to Swift Playground. So when you click this link, it's gonna download a playground for you. This is gonna be very similar to the first Swift exercise that we did together in class, just a little longer, and it'll give you the opportunity to change things in code yourself and try some stuff out, okay? So that's 3. And then the 4th thing is that this is a reading assignment. You're gonna read this sample. It's from a book that's actually about Ruby. But it's a really, really good chapter about writing methods in a way that's legible and easy to debug and figure out. And so it felt worthwhile to consider in the context of this class. So you're gonna read this sample, and then you're gonna answer these questions about it. What is duck typing? Does Swift have it? And then a technique from it that might not be applicable to Swift, and 2 techniques that are applicable to Swift, and you can demonstrate those 2 techniques in a playground. So those are your 4 things. I've tested these things. They should take cumulatively under 6 hours, but I will ask you in a survey in session 2 anyway, just to check, okay? Fantastic. So I'm done with you in terms of conferring material. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but I'm happy to stick around for a little bit if people have any follow-up questions. Sure, go ahead and unmute yourselves. We'll do this caucus style. No further questions?
I have a quick question more about Git and the homework. So I clicked the link and it created the repository, the MPCS51039 session 1 homework, and then my CNET. So do I actually go ahead and clone that repository into my local drive and then load my documents in there and then just add it and commit it? Or do I actually need to create, or yeah, is that the way you would do it?
You'll put your documents into the repo that was created, that you cloned, and then you'll commit those and you'll push them up. And it should be private just to you, myself, and Sarah.
Okay, and I don't need to do anything with the branches as far as that, because I saw it creates like 2 branches, I believe. when they
Yep.
create that homework. One is the
Mhm.
feedback and one is the
Mhm.
master. Okay, so
Yep.
just
So
commit it to
you
the
will
master.
push up onto the master branch, or if you choose to rename it the main branch, and then if Sarah or I have like comments or anything, then we can use that feedback branch to comment to you in a PR.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question just about some of the code that was coming up, some of the Swift code when we were making the dimmer.
Mhm.
So for when we would like drag the slider, and then it would create code that says like at IB outlet, like weak var dimmer, whatever. Will we learn more about what that means, or are we kind of just gonna stick with the click and drag approach?
Yeah, we will. We'll learn a little more about what it means. Totally. Good question. Cool. Well, I appreciate y'all sticking around all the way through. I know that 3 hours is a long class for a remote setup. I hope the breaks helped, kind of, and the exercises and stuff. We're going to try to keep this as interactive as we can. We'll try some different things. I'm sure some of it'll work and I'm sure some of it won't. So we'll figure it out, right? Cool. All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Yeah, totally.